Our next speaker is Tony Alpert. He is the Executive Director for the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, and he's going to talk about the large-scale assessment, their system they're using actually.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here as part of such an esteemed panel, but also just having made it through the last year, which was a significant accomplishment in and of itself. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the ecosystem that we use, if you will, the technology ecosystem to actually deploy our series of assessments. We've talked, I think, quite a bit about items development in this past few days. We've talked about test delivery, in essence, some of the background data, but how does it all fit together? How do we actually deploy it in an operational setting? So I'm going to talk a little bit about our technology system design that we planned out, and then what did we miss? Because there were definitely some mistakes along the way. I probably should have given some more background about Smarter Balance. At this point, I just assume that everyone knows who we are and what we do, but that's probably a little bit presumptuous. So at this point, Smarter Balance is a consortium of 15 states, as well as the Virgin Islands and the Bureau of Indian Education. We started as a consortium of approximately 26 states, varying levels of participation, way back in 2009. So I've been doing this now for 6 years, and it seems like many, many more. It was an innovative and aggressive prospect to essentially attempt to change the way the educational systems work using an assessment system. And it probably should have happened the other way. We would have hoped that change would have been instigated from instruction, but that's not the way things tend to work in the United States. So the assessment system became an opportunity to change the way teachers use information, the way they understand the content standards, the way they provide instruction to students, and the manner in which technology is available in schools. There are many instances in which districts use the opportunity that of the online nature of the assessment to argue that they needed to have more funds available to buy computers. And of course, we would have hoped that education, the students' opportunity to be able to engage in instruction would be the reason, but you take what you can get. So the prospect is now that there are more schools that have access to more technology, in part because of the assessment. So Smarter Balance offers a computer adaptive summative assessment that includes about 10 different item types, a range of objectively scored items, and some hand-scored items. And there's a complex process that service providers engage in to score those items and bring them back into a test, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It also includes an interim assessment. So the summative assessment is a secure assessment. The interim assessment uses the same item types. The items were developed at the exact same, through the exact same process. We sorted them out at the end of the first year of development. And those are not public. We don't want them posted on the internet, but they are not secure. That is, teachers can look at the questions, they can look at their students' responses. We actually encourage that as part of their formative process and as determining to what extent students have learned what they need to learn. And then we have a digital library, which includes a series of teacher-facing resources as part of a series of professional development efforts. So when we started out, we created a grant proposal that needed to get the endorsement of approximately 26 states, which you can imagine what that process was like. If you think about in your various departments, how often you can build consensus with your colleague next door on 200 pages of text. And throughout the process, though, Smarter Balanced has utilized a consensus-based decision-making process. That is, a single state can stop something from moving forward. And one would argue, people were skeptical at first, how would we be able to accomplish anything? But it turns out that people that object to things tend to do them object for good reasons. And if we have conversations about how could we make the process better, how could we change something so it works for you, we actually improve the process overall. So we use this consensus-based process throughout the initial grant, through the implementation of the system, and it's actually still embedded in our governance structure today. As we were thinking about deploying the operational system, we planned over 20 requests for proposals, and we tried to map out the connections of creating the validity chain, if you will, for content specifications that decompose the content standards into clusters of actionable units as part of evidence-centered design, and then item specifications that would use those content specifications, and then item development that would use the item specifications, and then a technology system that would deploy those items in an interoperable manner. For the most part, it worked out well. It turns out, though, if you have 20 different contracts with multiple vendors working on everything at the same time, the products themselves turn out well, but then when you connect them, you have a few problems. So that was, I don't know that we could have done it any different in 4 years. It was probably an inevitable consequence of an unreasonable timeline with unreasonable objectives, but nevertheless, it's probably a lesson that people can learn from. So it was clear to us at the outset, or at least clear to some of us, that this enterprise was as much an assessment enterprise as it was a technology enterprise. And so one of the first contracts that we released was an information systems architecture. How is this all going to work? How are we going to create the different pieces, and how are they going to integrate it? So you can think about it as a blueprint for a house. You want to have a kitchen, you want to have a dining room, you probably want to have a bathroom close to the dining room, because those things that happen in each of those tend to be connected, and so you want to have easy access. And so one of our first processes was we brought about 20 people together in Chicago, because that happened to be close to where the contract or the service provider was. And we started decomposing the process of not only test design, but test administration. And bringing people bringing their expertise about what they have done in the past, but also trying to get them to think differently about how it might be done in the future. And that's a pretty complex process. People are pretty attached to how they've done things in the past. So thinking about it differently required quite a bit of effort, and people talking about what was important to them, how could it be done differently, what could not be done differently, because it was so near and dear to their hearts. This is an example of a workflow product that was an outcome of that process. So you can see that we're describing item authoring, how our items develop. That goes into an item bank that connects to a test item bank, test spec bank that is more closely related to administration. So you can imagine there are many more items in process than those are in operation. And you really want to conceptually, at least conceptually, but probably physically at some point, keep those separate so you don't inadvertently put an item that's not operational into an operational test, and I'm sure many of you have had that unfortunate experience in your own systems. We've got test authoring, which groups items that describe how often, which items are connected to which test event and in what manner, what segment. We have segments for calculator-enabled items, that is those items that are not affected, the content isn't affected by the inclusion of a calculator, and then those for which a calculator should not be enabled because it would otherwise alter the meaning of the inference we might make. We've got to then export those items in a package so that people can actually use them, and then of course we need to deliver those items to students so that we can elicit their response, and then those items have to be scored, and then the results need to be reported. So this describes the general flow of information. we created this general architecture. What are the components that actually need to be in place? So at the top, we have shared services, which includes information about which states are engaged, which states are eligible to use which components. We have the content standards, which are our basis for information that's used in the reporting system. It's also used in the digital library. I think one of the big mistakes in this diagram is that the digital library is a very, very small component up there, but it's actually, it's a third of our system. It is our formative assessment practices. It's where teachers learn about how to improve their instructional practices and communicate with each other and give each other support as they're trying to solve shared problems and provide shared solutions. So if we do redo this, we would pull the digital library out and make sure that it's at the same level it appears to be the same level of importance as these other components. I should mention that all of this information is posted on our website. We have a strong commitment to transparency. We also have a strong commitment to open source. So a lot of this is structured so that our system can be provided on multiple platforms. We do sponsor an open source test delivery system, an open source reporting system, an open source digital library that is all available on through what we call Smarter App. It's our sister website where you folks can go in, and if you have extra time, you can stand up your own instance of a test delivery system. So enjoy. The reason why we're supporting that is for a couple of the reasons. The first is that in the past, states have repurchased a test delivery system over and over and over again. Interestingly, there's always startup costs whenever they change vendors, even if the system essentially provides the same functionality. And states had to shift. They had to import their items and export their items multiple times and go through that extra effort every time to try and make things work. And for teachers, they constantly had to relearn a system, and so did students. So what we wanted to do was give states an option to perhaps change their service providers when they wanted to, but maintain their test delivery system so that the experience is seamless for teachers and students. But the other piece is we had to have a gold standard. So for those of you that are familiar with the question test interoperability standard, you know that it defines a lot of elements of content. What it doesn't define is the position of that content. So you can imagine that we generally agree that the reading passage, if you've got it side by side, that the reading passage appears on the left-hand side and questions appear on the right-hand side. But that is something that is determined by humans. It's not defined by the QTI interface. And so if we want to allow not only our test information or our test delivery system to be used, but we also want other providers to be able to use their own proprietary test engine, we have to have a gold standard. And so our open source system becomes our gold standard by which we're able to use, serve as a reference to show how items are supposed to be represented in order to yield comparable results. So you can see we've got assessment creation and management. We've got assessment delivery and assessment reporting. I won't go into much detail about each of these, but needless to say, each of these little boxes encompasses a huge volume of work, not only in terms of the applications that support it, but the amount of effort that needs to go into actually making those applications operational. So some things that aren't showing on that I think are really important to note. We do support open source secure browsers. That is, we place a wraparound around open source web browsers, and we force the web browsers to do exactly what they were designed not to do. That is, we try to interfere with the operation of the computer and limit the amount of access to information that students have. And there's a good reason for that. If students can search the internet to find out the answers to problems, then we're probably measuring their ability to search and not their knowledge about the content, which may be an admirable goal, but And if we have a content standard in which we're trying to measure that, we would use that as part of our function. But for the most part, we're trying to find out what has the student learned as part of instruction and not what can they search on. So that's a whole body of work, and I will say that we tried to get service providers to support the testing of the different secure browsers across multiple platforms. And it was the first time, I think, ever that Google, Apple, and Microsoft all agreed on something, and they agreed that we were wrong. So they thought that they should not pay for that we should pay for that. So we had to come up with a different system. We developed an implementation readiness package in order to support that interoperability. That's also publicly on our website. We had to develop an item viewer so that people could look at items independent of the system. And we had to quickly develop a hand scoring application to allow teachers the opportunity to hand score interim assessment items, because it does include hand scored items as well as objectively scored items. And then there's a whole bunch of work as well. So I encourage you to look at our website, our public website, and also that sister website, Smarter App, and you'll find a whole bunch of specifications that support an interoperable large-scale assessment in an open source environment. So, thank you.